I became a director, which I thought helped me escape a toxic family, but they started manipulating my inheritance. Hey Reddit, I'm 23, and honestly, I've been carrying a lot of frustration about my family for years. From the outside, we looked like we had it all together. My parents ran a successful business, we lived comfortably, and people probably thought I was this lucky kid with everything handed to me. But the reality was far from it. My parents were the definition of too busy. They were always preoccupied with work, or so they said. Anytime I tried to spend time with them or get them involved in my life, they brushed me off with the excuse that they were doing all this for me. But as I got older, I noticed they had plenty of time for the things they wanted to do, golfing, spa days, hanging out with friends, but none for me. I'm an only child, so you'd think I would have gotten at least some attention. Nope. The house was quiet, not in a peaceful way but in a cold, empty kind of way. Birthdays were small, family dinners were rare, and most conversations felt like business meetings. How's school? What's your plan for college? They were more interested in my future as a potential cog in their business than in me. By high school, I realized that if I wanted to feel like I mattered, I'd have to find my own way. I started picking up small hustles, selling stuff online, flipping old bikes, tutoring kids in math. I wasn't just doing it for money, I wanted independence. Anything to make me feel like I wasn't stuck in their shadow. Then, one night, everything clicked. I was watching Inception in my room, headphones on, trying to escape another silent evening. By the end of it, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, inspired. That movie hit me in a way I couldn't shake. I spent the next few days watching interviews with directors, behind-the-scenes footage, and tutorials. That's when it hit me, I didn't just want to watch stories like that, I wanted to make them. When I told my parents about my dream of becoming a filmmaker, they weren't supportive. My dad actually laughed. My mom just said, "You'll grow out of it." They were already planning for me to work in their business after graduation, and anything outside of that was just silly. But I couldn't let their doubt stop me. I doubled down on saving every penny. I worked harder, put money aside, and researched film schools that could get me out of there. The day I got accepted to a program in another state was the day I finally felt free. Moving out wasn't just about chasing my dream, it was about escaping a house where I'd never felt truly wanted. Film school was everything I hoped it would be, even though it was a grind. Between classes, I worked nights bartending, editing videos for small businesses, and even doing some odd gigs, like being a mascot at a kid's party. It was tough, but I loved every second of it. By the end of my first year, I'd saved enough to take the leap and shoot my first short film. It wasn't going to be a blockbuster, but it was mine, something I could finally show for all my hard work. I had the script ready, a crew of classmates willing to help, and just enough equipment to make it happen. Then, out of nowhere, my parents called. At first, I thought it was just a check-in, which was already unusual. But after a bit of small talk, they got to the real reason. The business was struggling, and they needed my help. Financially, personally, completely. I tried to explain that I was in the middle of a big project, but they wouldn't listen. They threw every emotional card at me, how I owed it to them, how they'd sacrificed for me, how I was abandoning my family. The guilt trip was relentless. That call set off a chain of events I never saw coming. At first, I tried to stand my ground. I told my parents that I was busy, that I couldn't just drop everything and come running. I thought they'd understand, or at least compromise. But no, they doubled down. "It's not just about us," my dad said. "This is your family business. One day, it'll be yours." I wanted to scream. The business was never mine. It had always been their thing, and they'd never shown any interest in including me until now, when they were desperate. Still, they kept pushing. My mom started calling every day, leaving guilt-laden voicemails about how they were overwhelmed and didn't know who else to turn to. When guilt didn't work, they switched to manipulation. They told me they'd have to let people go if I didn't help, that it could ruin the lives of loyal employees. Then came the cherry on top: "If you don't help us now, don't expect to inherit anything later." That one stung. Not because I cared about the money, I didn't, but because it showed how transactional they were willing to make our relationship. It wasn't about love or support, it was about control. For a few days, I tried to brush it off, but the calls didn't stop. My mom even roped in some of my relatives. I started getting texts from an aunt and a couple of cousins telling me how selfish I was being. One even said, "Family comes first." Always. Easy for them to say when they weren't being dragged into this mess. Finally, I caved. I told myself it would be just this once. A quick trip home, a couple of weeks of helping out, and then I'd get back to my life. I convinced myself it was the right thing to do, if not for them, then for the people working for them. When I got home, things were worse than I thought. The business wasn't just struggling, it was on the brink of collapse. They'd made some terrible decisions, overspending, bad investments, and taking on way too much debt. It was like watching a train wreck in slow motion. For the next month, I poured everything I had into helping them. I worked long hours alongside my dad, used what little savings I had left to cover some urgent bills, and even pitched in a few ideas that seemed to stabilize things. Slowly, the business started to recover. I thought that when it was all over, they'd at least show some appreciation. A thank you, or an acknowledgement of the sacrifices I'd made. But instead, it was business as usual. The moment things were back on track, they acted like nothing had happened. My dad went back to golfing, and my mom started planning a weekend getaway. When I told them I was heading back to finish my film, my dad just shrugged and said, "Do what you want." No thanks. No apology for all the manipulation. Nothing. I left feeling used. But I told myself it was over. I could move on and put the whole thing behind me. I couldn't have been more wrong. A couple of months later, I was back in my groove. I'd returned to film school, reconnected with my classmates, and was finally putting the finishing touches on my short film. Things were looking up, until my phone rang again. It was my mom. "We need you to come home," she said, her voice urgent but somehow still demanding. "We've hit another rough patch." I couldn't believe it. After everything I'd done, they were already back to square one. I told her I was busy, that I couldn't drop everything again, especially not so soon. Her tone shifted immediately. "You're abandoning us? After everything we've done for you?" That was it. Something inside me snapped. I reminded her how I'd already drained my savings, put my life on hold, and worked myself to the bone to help them last time, only to be dismissed and unappreciated when it was over. "We didn't ask you to spend your money," she fired back. "That was your choice. And besides, we're your parents. It's your responsibility to help us." I told her I wasn't coming back. Not this time. That's when the threat started. My dad joined the calls, reminding me about the inheritance. "If you can't show loyalty to your family, don't expect to see a dime of what we've built," he said, like they were dangling some golden carrot in front of me. But the thing is, I didn't care. I'd stopped caring about their money long ago. Still, the manipulation didn't stop. My mom told me I was selfish, that I was choosing strangers over my own family. Then they went a step further, they got the extended family involved. Suddenly, my phone was blowing up with texts and calls from relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. "You're breaking your parents' hearts," one uncle said. "How can you turn your back on them when they need you most?" another cousin chimed in. It was exhausting. Every day, a new wave of guilt, accusations, and pleas. They even started leaving voicemails so I couldn't ignore them. I felt like I couldn't breathe. Finally, I decided enough was enough. I changed my phone number and blocked anyone who tried to guilt-trip me. I even wrote myself out of the inheritance, emailing them a formal statement so they couldn't use it as leverage anymore. For the first time in my life, I felt free. The silence was blissful. No more guilt, no more manipulation, no more being treated like a tool instead of a son. It's been a few months since I cut contact, and honestly, I've never been happier. I've been focusing on my film and rebuilding the life I almost lost. Every now and then, I'll hear through the grapevine that they're still upset, but I don't care anymore. I realized something important: family isn't just about blood. It's about respect, love, and mutual support. If they couldn't give me that, then I didn't owe them anything. At first, cutting ties with my parents felt like a weight had been lifted. For the first time in years, I could focus entirely on myself and my passion. My film project was finally coming together, and with no constant interruptions or guilt-tripping, I felt like I was making real progress. But as much as I wanted to move forward, the fallout from my decision followed me like a shadow. Extended family members weren't done with their opinions. Word spread fast, and soon enough, I was the family's newest villain. "Your parents gave you everything, and this is how you repay them," my aunt wrote in an email that somehow still found its way to me, even with my new number. "I'm disappointed in you," my grandmother said during a voicemail. "Family sticks together. You don't just walk away." It wasn't just the direct attacks either. The whispers and judgment came from every direction. Relatives who had barely said a word to me over the years were suddenly experts on how I should be living my life. What hurt most was realizing how deep the manipulation ran. Growing up, I'd been so used to their control and emotional games that part of me still second-guessed my decision. Was I a bad son? Could I have done more? But every time I considered reaching out, I reminded myself of how they treated me when I sacrificed for them, and how quickly they turned on me when I stood my ground. Meanwhile, I poured everything I had into my film. It became more than just a project. It was my way of proving to myself that I was capable of building something without them. The more I worked, the more confident I became. Then came the real kicker. A few weeks ago, I got a call from a friend back in my hometown. He told me my parents were telling everyone that I'd abandoned them and refused to help during a family crisis. They'd spun the story to make themselves look like the victims, conveniently leaving out all the sacrifices I'd already made for them. It stung, but it also reminded me why I'd walked away. This was who they were, masters of deflection and manipulation. I couldn't change that, but I also didn't have to be a part of it anymore. I've started building my own chosen family, friends and classmates who genuinely care about me and support my dreams. They've been my rock during this whole mess, reminding me that cutting toxic people out, even when they're family, is sometimes the only way to heal. Now, I'm finally nearing the finish line on my film. It's not perfect, but it's mine. Every time I see it coming together, I feel a sense of pride I never got from trying to please my parents. The fallout isn't over, and I'm sure I'll hear more through the grapevine, but for now, I'm okay with the silence. Life was finally settling into a rhythm. My short film was in post-production, and I was thinking about submitting it to a few local festivals. For the first time in years, I felt like I was on track, free from the constant emotional baggage my family had tied to me. Then, out of nowhere, I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. "Hey, it's Mom. Can we talk?" I stared at the screen for what felt like an eternity. I'd changed my number specifically to avoid this. How had she even found me? Against my better judgment, curiosity got the better of me. I replied, "What's this about?" Within minutes, my phone rang. I almost let it go to voicemail but picked up at the last second. "Hi, sweetheart," my mom said, her tone almost too cheerful. "I hope you're doing well. I was just thinking about you and wanted to check in." It was jarring. She sounded like the perfect, loving parent I'd always wished for, but I knew better than to let my guard down. "Why are you really calling, Mom?" I asked bluntly. She sighed, dropping the friendly facade. "Your dad and I have been talking, and we think it's time to move past everything. We're still family, and family needs to stick together. Can we meet up and talk?" It felt like a trap, but there was a small part of me, a piece that hadn't completely let go of the hope for a normal relationship, that wanted to hear them out. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet them at a diner near my apartment the next weekend. When I walked into the diner, I saw them sitting in a booth, their faces lighting up when they saw me. For a moment, I felt like a kid again, craving their approval. But I pushed that aside and sat down. We made small talk for a while, how school was going, how the film was coming along, but I could feel the tension under the surface. Finally, my dad leaned forward and said, "We've missed you, you know. It's not the same without you." "I miss you too," my mom added, her voice soft. "And we want to make things right." I was suspicious. What does "make things right" mean, exactly? They exchanged a glance before my mom said, "Well, your dad and I were thinking, the business could really use some young energy. You've always been so smart and resourceful. If you come back and help, we can figure out a way to make this work for everyone." There it was. I couldn't help but laugh, an incredulous, bitter laugh. "So this isn't about fixing things between us. You just want me back for the business." My dad frowned. "That's not fair. We're offering you a real chance to be a part of something bigger. It's what's best for all of us." "No, Dad," I said, shaking my head. "It's what's best for you. I've already helped once. I gave up my time, my savings, and my energy for you, and you didn't even thank me. You went right back to pretending like I didn't exist." They both tried to protest, but I didn't let them. "I'm done being your backup plan. I'm building a life for myself, a life I'm proud of, and I'm not giving it up just because you need a bailout again." For the first time, I saw genuine emotion on my mom's face. Her eyes welled up, and she whispered, "We were wrong. We didn't appreciate you the way we should have. But you're still our son." That hit me harder than I expected. A part of me wanted to believe her, to let myself hope that maybe they meant it this time. But I couldn't ignore the years of neglect, manipulation, and selfishness. "I am your son," I said, standing up, "but I can't keep setting myself on fire to keep you warm. If you ever want to talk, just talk, I'm open to that. But don't call me again unless it's about repairing our relationship, not the business." I walked out before they could respond. Later that night, as I sat editing my film, I thought about the meeting. It hurt to see them, to be reminded of what I'd always wanted but never had. But walking away felt like the closure I needed. For the first time, I wasn't weighed down by their expectations. It felt like freedom. After that meeting with my parents, I thought I'd feel more conflicted, but instead, I felt a strange sense of peace. For years, I'd bent over backward to earn their love and approval, but walking out of that diner, I realized something important. I didn't need it anymore. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into the final stages of my film. The long nights of editing, fine-tuning sound design, and adding just the right music reminded me why I'd chosen this path in the first place. For the first time in my life, I was creating something that felt mine, a reflection of my effort, passion, and vision. My professors started to take notice too. One of them, a seasoned indie filmmaker, pulled me aside after class one day. "This project of yours, it's got something special," he said. "You ever think about submitting it to festivals?" I'd thought about it but hadn't seriously considered it. Festivals felt like a far-off dream, something for people with bigger budgets and better connections. But hearing it from him, it gave me the push I needed. By the end of the week, I'd applied to 3 smaller film festivals, just to test the waters. The idea of my work being seen by people outside of my school was exhilarating, and terrifying. What if they hated it? What if no one even gave it a chance? Meanwhile, life kept throwing little curveballs. A mutual friend reached out to tell me that my parents had been asking about me. "They're saying they just want to talk," she said cautiously. No strings attached this time. I knew better than to believe that. As much as I wanted to trust their intentions, their pattern of behavior was too hard to ignore. Every olive branch from them had always come with hidden strings, and I wasn't about to get tangled up again. Still, it was hard not to think about them, what they were saying, whether they missed me or just missed what I could do for them. Every time I felt myself wavering, I reminded myself of how much lighter my life felt without their constant demands. And just when I thought things were quieting down, something incredible happened. One of the festivals I'd applied to accepted my film. Not only that, but they'd chosen it to screen in the Emerging Voices category, a section dedicated to highlighting new talent. I was stunned. For so long, I'd carried this weight of never being enough, never being seen or valued, not by my parents, not even by myself sometimes. But now, here was this validation from people who didn't know me, who had no reason to be biased, saying that what I'd created was worth something. The screening was scheduled for a few weeks later, and I threw myself into preparing for it. I refined the final cut, created promotional materials, and even started practicing how I'd answer questions if anyone wanted to talk to me after the showing. Then, a week before the festival, I got another call from my mom. I didn't pick up, but she left a voicemail. "Hey, it's me. I heard about your film. One of your cousins told me. We're really proud of you. If it's okay, your dad and I would love to come see it. No pressure. Just let us know." I listened to the message 3 times. It was the first time I'd ever heard her say she was proud of me. I didn't know what to do. For days, I couldn't get my mom's voicemail out of my head. "We're really proud of you." Was she being sincere? Or was this just another attempt to get back into my life for their own benefit? I replayed it over and over, trying to dissect her tone. It sounded genuine, different from the usual guilt or manipulation, but years of their behavior had taught me to be cautious. Part of me wanted to call her back, to let them come to the screening and see what I'd accomplished without their help. Maybe this was their way of turning over a new leaf. But another part of me, wounded and protective, didn't trust it. What if they came and made the day about them? What if they found a way to criticize me, even here? After everything I'd been through, was I ready to give them the power to hurt me again? I went back and forth until the night before the festival. A close friend, Emily, who had been my rock through all this, came over to help me get ready. She could tell something was on my mind. "Okay," she said, sitting down on my couch with a glass of wine. "What's going on? You've been pacing all day." I told her about the voicemail, how my parents wanted to come, and how conflicted I felt about it. Emily listened quietly, nodding as I spilled my thoughts. "You know," she said finally, "it's okay to want them there. And it's okay if you don't. But if you let them come, you need to go into it with no expectations. If they disappoint you again, you can't let it ruin this moment. This is your day." Her words hit me hard. She was right. Whether they showed up or not, this was my accomplishment, and I wasn't going to let anyone take it away from me. So, I decided to call them. My mom picked up almost immediately, like she'd been waiting. "Hey, Mom," I said, my voice steady. "About the screening, you and Dad can come if you want. It's at 4 p.m. at the Riverview Theater. But this is really important to me, and I need you to understand that this day isn't about fixing things or talking about the past. It's just about my film." There was a pause on the other end before she spoke. "Of course. We wouldn't want to ruin this for you. Thank you for letting us come." When I hung up, I felt a strange mix of relief and anxiety. I'd taken a chance, but now the ball was in their court. The day of the festival came faster than I expected. I arrived early with Emily and a few friends to check in and get a feel for the space. My nerves were on fire as people started filling the theater. Among the crowd, I saw familiar faces, classmates, professors, even a few relatives who had heard about the screening through word of mouth. And then, right before the lights dimmed, I saw them, my parents. They slipped in quietly, sitting near the back. My dad gave me a small wave, and my mom smiled, but they didn't come over to talk. As the film started, I forgot about them for a while. Watching my work on the big screen, surrounded by people reacting to something I'd created, was surreal. The laughs came in the right places, the silences hung heavy where I'd intended. By the end, the applause felt like a dream. Afterward, people came up to congratulate me, ask questions, and offer feedback. My professor gave me a proud pat on the back, and Emily hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. I was so caught up in the moment that I didn't notice my parents standing off to the side. When I finally did, I hesitated. But before I could decide whether to approach them, they walked over. "You did good, kid," my dad said, his voice soft. My mom nodded, her eyes glassy with what looked like tears. "Thanks," I said cautiously, unsure of what else to say. "We won't keep you," my mom said after a moment. "We just wanted to say we're proud of you. Really. And, if you ever want to talk, we're here." I nodded, unsure how to feel as they turned and left. It wasn't the grand reconciliation I'd imagined as a kid, but it felt like a start. Later that night, as I lay in bed replaying the day in my mind, I realized something. Whether my parents and I ever fully repaired our relationship didn't matter as much as I thought it did. I'd proven to myself that I was capable, strong, and worthy of the life I was building. And that was enough. In the days after the festival, I felt both proud and reflective. The applause and questions from strangers were surreal, but what stuck with me most was my parents' quiet acknowledgement of my work. It wasn't reconciliation, but it felt like the first step. A week later, my professor encouraged me to submit my film to a bigger festival. It was an opportunity one hadn't dared to dream of, and it lit a fire in me to keep pushing forward. That same week, I got a text from my mom, "We're so proud of you. Your dad and I would love to have dinner, no pressure." It wasn't manipulative, just simple. I hesitated but eventually agreed. Over dinner, they surprised me. My dad admitted they'd been selfish, and my mom said seeing my success made them realize how much they'd taken me for granted. I was cautious, but I appreciated the gesture. It wasn't a perfect evening, but it felt like the start of something. As I headed home, I knew one thing for sure, whether or not my relationship with them healed, I was in control of my own life now. After dinner with my parents, I couldn't stop thinking about what they'd said. Their apology had caught me off guard. A part of me wanted to believe they were sincere, but another part, shaped by years of manipulation, stayed cautious. I decided to take it slow, acknowledge their effort but keep my boundaries intact. Meanwhile, my life was picking up speed. My film was accepted into the larger festival, and I started networking with other filmmakers. For the first time, I wasn't just a student, I felt like I was part of a creative community. It was exciting, and I threw myself into planning my next project. But my parents didn't fade into the background. They started reaching out more, texts, calls, even small gestures like asking about my work. It wasn't perfect, but it wasn't pushy either. It felt different. One weekend, they invited me over for dinner. I was hesitant but curious. When I arrived, the atmosphere was surprisingly warm. My dad showed genuine interest in my work, asking thoughtful questions about filmmaking. My mom didn't bring up the business once, and for the first time, the conversation felt about me, not what I could do for them. I still kept my guard up, but I found myself appreciating the effort they were making. A few weeks later, the bigger festival finally came. This time, I didn't even tell my parents. I wanted to focus entirely on the experience without worrying about their presence. The screening was an incredible success, people came up afterward to ask about my work, and I even received a few offers to collaborate on future projects. That night, I sat in my tiny apartment, staring at the offers and messages, and felt something I hadn't in a long time, validation. Not from my parents, but from myself. I'd proven that I could do this on my own, that I could carve out a life and identity outside of their influence. When I finally told them about the success, they were thrilled. My mom even teared up over the phone, saying, "We're so proud of you. Truly." I didn't know where things would go from here, but for once, I felt like I was meeting them on equal ground. Slowly, cautiously, I was starting to let them back in. After the festival, life started to feel complete. My film gained traction, I began collaborating with other filmmakers, and my next project was already taking shape. For the first time, I felt like I was truly thriving. At the same time, my relationship with my parents continued to shift. They stayed consistent, asking about my work, sharing encouragement, and, most importantly, respecting my boundaries. When I invited them to visit, they surprised me. They showed genuine interest in my life without any judgment or hidden motives. At one point, my dad said, "You've built a good life for yourself. We're proud of you." And for the first time, I believed it. I realized then that while I didn't need their approval, I could accept their effort. They weren't perfect, but they were trying, and I was strong enough now to let them in, on my terms. Family, I learned, is what you make of it. Mine wasn't just the people I was born to, but the friends and collaborators who'd stood by me all along. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving, I was building the life I'd always wanted.